Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Settle in, draw the blankets a little closer, because tonight we're venturing into the shadows, into those unsettling corners of reality where explanations fray and goosebumps bloom. You've come seeking a thrill, a delicious shiver down your spine, and trust me, you've come to the right place. Over the next little while, we'll explore 5 tales, each a descent into the strange and the unsettling. Think of it as a guided tour through the landscapes of the unknown, a journey best taken in the comforting darkness. Our first stop, a place steeped in mystique, a haven for artists and seekers, but also a stage for a phenomenon that has baffled and tormented for decades. Taos, New Mexico. Picture the vast starlit desert sky, the adobe architecture whispering secrets in the dry air. It's here, in the high desert, that our story begins, a story we call the Hum of Taos. The late 90s in Taos were much like any other time there, a blend of vibrant artistic energy and a quiet, almost otherworldly stillness. Eleanor, a sound engineer with a reputation for sharp ears and an even sharper mind, arrived in this picturesque town with a singular purpose: to silence a sound. Not a disruptive concert or a faulty generator, but something far more insidious, far more elusive. They called it the Hum of Taos, a low-frequency drone, persistent thrumming that plagued a small percentage of the population. Some described it as the rumble of a distant truck, others as the deep sigh of the earth itself. For those who could hear it, and many couldn't, much to their bewildered relief, it was a relentless tormentor. Headaches bloomed behind their eyes, nausea coiled in their stomachs, and sleep became a fractured, distant memory. Some swore it was infrasound, the kind of low-frequency waves that can travel for miles, generated by some unknown industrial source. Others whispered of more esoteric origins, of subterranean currents, or even extraterrestrial signals. Eleanor, in her late 40s, was a woman of logic and decibels. Her slightly impaired hearing in her left ear had, ironically, sharpened her focus on the nuances of sound with her right. She'd built her career on identifying and isolating sonic anomalies, on bringing order to the chaos of the auditory world. Mass hysteria? Suggestion? These were the likely culprits, she reasoned as her rental car kept dust on the long, winding road into Taos. A few strategically placed sensors, a spectrum analyzer, and she'd have the phantom hum debunked before the week was out. Her initial days were a study in frustration. The people who claimed to hear the hum were earnest, their distress palpable. They spoke of a constant pressure in their ears, a vibration that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. They pointed to vague directions, argued over its intensity at different times of day, but no one could pinpoint its source. Eleanor set up her equipment in various locations, the quiet outskirts of town, the bustling center, even in the isolated stillness of the desert. The readings were clean, almost unnervingly so. Days bled into nights. Eleanor, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a stubborn refusal to admit defeat, delved deeper. She interviewed doctors, read local news archives, even spoke to some of the more spiritually inclined residents who offered theories ranging from military experiments to the breathing of the planet. Each avenue led to a dead end, a whisper of something unidentifiable. Then it started. A faint pressure in her right ear, a subtle vibration that she initially dismissed as fatigue. But it persisted, growing slowly, inexorably. It wasn't a sharp sound, not a tone she could easily analyze. It was a deep, resonant thrum, a feeling more than a sound, a constant presence that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. Eleanor, the skeptic, the woman of science, began to feel the edges of her carefully constructed reality fray. Her equipment still registered nothing, yet the hum was there, a constant companion in the quiet New Mexico nights. Sleep became a battle against this unseen, unheard tormentor. Her focus blurred, her pragmatic mind struggling to find a logical explanation for something that defied logic. She found herself drawn to the stories of others who suffered from the hum, their experiences mirroring her own growing distress. They spoke of a feeling of being watched, of an underlying unease that the hum seemed to amplify. Some reported strange dreams, vivid and unsettling. Eleanor, too, began to experience a creeping sense of dread, a feeling that something was subtly, inexorably wrong with the very fabric of this place. One particularly still night, standing on the porch of her rented adobe house, the vast expanse of the desert sky stretching above her like an inky blanket dusted with diamonds, the hum intensified. It wasn't just a vibration anymore, it felt almost purposeful. A resonant frequency that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. She strained her good ear, trying to isolate a direction, a source, anything. But there was only the vast silence of the desert, punctuated by that relentless internal thrum. A sudden chill snaked down her spine. It wasn't the desert cold, it was something else, something primal. The feeling of being observed intensified, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She spun around, scanning the darkness, but there was nothing. Only the silent, watchful stars and the persistent, maddening hum. Eleanor, the sound engineer who came to debunk a mystery, was now caught in its unsettling embrace. The Hum of Taos had found her. And as the first tendrils of a fear she couldn't explain began to tighten around her heart, she knew one thing for certain. Her scientific instruments couldn't measure the true depth of this unsettling phenomenon. And that, my friends, is where our first story leaves us, hanging in the still desert air. The hum, a persistent question mark in the silence. Take a moment to let that unease settle. Perhaps stretch your legs, take a deep breath. Because the night is young, and the shadows hold more secrets yet. Our next tale will take us to the mysterious lights dancing on a lonely mountain in North Carolina. Are you ready to journey there with me? I hope the chill from Taos hasn't quite left your bones, because we're moving from the arid desert to the misty peaks of the Appalachian Mountains, to a place where the veil between worlds seems thin and the night itself holds its breath. Our next story whispers from the slopes of Brown Mountain, North Carolina, a place of rugged beauty, where ancient forests cling to the steep slopes, and the wind carries the scent of pine and damp earth. For decades, perhaps even centuries, this mountain has guarded a secret, a mystery that dances in the darkness and defies explanation. Samuel, a man etched with the lines of time and the wisdom of the wilderness, knew this mountain like the back of his hand. As a retired park ranger, he'd spent his life amidst its towering trees and hidden valleys, his heart attuned to the rhythms of the natural world. But even Samuel, with his deep respect for the tangible, couldn't deny the strange phenomena that flickered across Brown Mountain's face. They called them the Brown Mountain Lights. Not the steady glow of distant towns, not the sweep of headlights on winding roads. These were different, ethereal, unpredictable. They appeared as orbs of light, sometimes a single point, sometimes a cluster, their colors shifting from a soft, warm white to an eerie, spectral blue. They danced on the slopes, sometimes hovering, sometimes darting with impossible speed, defying gravity and logic. Samuel had seen them countless times over the years. He tried to rationalize them, to find a logical explanation that would fit within the framework of his understanding. He'd heard the theories, swamp gas, quartz reflections, even the headlights of moonshiners, but none of them quite fit. None of them explained the way the lights seemed to watch. There was an unsettling feeling that accompanied the lights, a sense of being observed by something ancient and unknowable. It wasn't a feeling of malice, not exactly, but of profound otherness, as if the mountain itself were alive, and these lights were its eyes, peering into the world of men. He remembered one night in particular. The air was thick with mist, a damp, clinging shroud that muted every sound. He was on a ridge overlooking the mountain, the beam of his flashlight swallowed by the fog. Then they appeared. 3 lights, glowing with an intense, almost unnatural brilliance. They moved slowly, deliberately, tracing a path along the tree line, as if searching for something. Samuel felt a shiver crawl up his spine, a primal fear that had nothing to do with the cold. He switched off his flashlight, plunging himself into the absolute darkness, and watched. The lights continued their silent dance, their ethereal glow illuminating the swirling mist, creating a scene of otherworldly beauty and profound unease. He felt in that moment as if he'd stepped outside the boundaries of the known world, into a realm where the laws of physics held little sway. The lights weren't just a visual phenomenon. They were a presence, a mystery that resonated deep within his soul. Over the years, Samuel had learned to respect the lights, to acknowledge their presence without trying to understand them. He'd come to believe that some mysteries were best left unsolved, that some doors were better left unopened. The Brown Mountain Lights were a reminder that the world held secrets far beyond human comprehension. That even in the familiar embrace of the natural world, the unknown could reach out and touch you. And so we leave Samuel, standing on the misty slopes of Brown Mountain, the lights a silent question mark in the darkness. A reminder that even in the most familiar places, the unexplained can flicker to life, leaving us with a sense of wonder and a touch of unease. Now take a moment to shake off the mountain chill and prepare yourselves, because our journey into the strange continues. Our next stop takes us to the heartland of America, to a place where the darkness wasn't just in the night, but in the hearts of men. Are you ready to hear the story of the Hinterkaifeck of Kansas? We've journeyed through unexplained lights and unsettling hums. Now we turn to a different kind of darkness, a darkness born not of the unknown, but of human cruelty and the lingering stain of a terrible unsolved crime. Our next story takes us to the heartland, to a place where the silence screams and the past refuses to stay buried. Tonight we delve into a tale inspired by a true American tragedy, a story we'll call the Hinterkaifeck of Kansas. The fields of rural Kansas in the early 1900s stretched out like a patchwork quilt under the vast prairie sky. Life moved at a slower pace here, dictated by the rhythm of the seasons, a world away from the bustling cities. Martha, a young schoolteacher barely out of her 20s, arrived in this quiet, isolated farming community with a heart full of idealism and a suitcase brimming with books. She'd secured a teaching position at the small local schoolhouse and rented an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, a place that offered a sense of peaceful solitude. The farmhouse was rustic. It had a certain charm, with its wide porch and the whispering cottonwood trees in the yard. But there was also a palpable stillness to the place, a silence that felt heavier than mere quiet. Martha, fresh from the more lively atmosphere of the city, initially found it soothing. But as the days turned into weeks, a subtle unease began to creep into her idyllic picture. The locals were friendly enough, in a reserved Midwestern way, but she noticed a certain reluctance when she asked about the history of the area, a shadow that seemed to flicker in their eyes. It wasn't until Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman who ran the general store, spoke in hushed tones about the tragedy that had befallen a family years ago, a family who had lived not too far from Martha's new home. Mrs. Gable spoke of the Millers, John, Sarah, and their 3 young children, and a visiting neighbor, all found brutally murdered in their beds one morning. An axe was the weapon, wielded with a savage fury that defied comprehension. The crime had shocked the small community to its core, leaving behind a wound that time had never fully healed. What made it even more unsettling was that the killer or killers had never been found. As Martha settled into her routine, the weight of this unsolved horror began to permeate her peaceful solitude. The silence in her old farmhouse no longer felt comforting. It felt like a held breath, as if the very walls were listening, remembering. She started noticing things. A floorboard that creaked when no one was there, a window that seemed to swing gently despite the lack of a breeze, a faint, inexplicable chill in certain rooms, even on warm days. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Martha was grading papers in the quiet of her living room. A sudden, sharp thud from the attic made her jump. Her heart pounded in her chest. Mice, she told herself. It must be mice. But the sound had been too heavy, too deliberate for a small rodent. She grabbed a kerosene lamp, its flickering light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, and cautiously made her way up the narrow stairs to the attic. Dust motes danced in the lamplight, illuminating the bare wooden beams and forgotten relics of previous occupants. There was no sign of any animal, just the stillness, the oppressive silence that seemed to press in on her. As she stood there, a sudden wave of nausea washed over her. accompanied by a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. She retreated quickly, locking the attic door behind her, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. The feeling persisted. She would wake in the dead of night to a sense of heavy presence in her room, a feeling that vanished the moment she fully awoke. She started having vivid, disturbing dreams, shadowy figures moving through the darkness, the dull thud of an axe echoing in the silence. Martha, who had arrived in this quiet community with such optimism, now felt a growing sense of dread. The unsolved tragedy of the Miller family seemed to have seeped into the very fabric of the land, a lingering darkness that clung to the old farmhouses and whispered on the wind. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in the shadow of something terrible, that the unanswered questions of the past still hung heavy in the air. One afternoon, while exploring the woods behind her house, she stumbled upon the overgrown remnants of an old foundation. It was the site of the Miller farm. A sense of profound sadness washed over her as she stood amidst the tangled weeds and crumbling stones, imagining the lives that had been so brutally extinguished here. The air felt cold, even under the warm sun, and a strange, unsettling stillness permeated the woods. As she turned to leave, she thought she heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper on the breeze, a sound that seemed to carry a hint of sorrow and terror. She stopped, listening intently, but there was only the rustling of leaves. Yet, the feeling lingered, the sense that the past was not truly gone, that the silence of this quiet Kansas landscape held the echoes of a horrific night, a night whose secrets were still buried deep within the soil. And so, Martha finds herself living in the shadow of a terrible, unsolved crime, the silence of the Kansas countryside, broken only by the whispers of the past. A chilling reminder that the most profound darkness can be born not of the supernatural, but of the unimaginable cruelty that lies within the human heart. Now, take a moment to compose yourselves. Our journey into the unsettling continues. Next, we travel to the vibrant streets of New Orleans, where a different kind of terror once stalked the night. Are you ready to hear the tale of the Phantom Barber? We've journeyed through quiet landscapes haunted by unseen forces and the lingering echoes of past horrors. Now, we find ourselves in a city that breathes music and mystery, a place where the vibrant energy of life dances alongside the shadows of the unknown. Tonight, we descend into the sultry, gaslit streets of New Orleans in the early 1900s, a time when a chilling fear gripped the city, a fear whispered on the humid night air. Our next story tells of the Phantom Barber of New Orleans. New Orleans in the early 20th century was a symphony of sounds, a melting pot of cultures, a city that pulsed with a unique, intoxicating energy. Jazz music spilled from the smoky confines of dimly lit clubs, the aroma of Creole cooking hung heavy in the air, and the Mississippi River flowed like a dark, mysterious artery through its heart. But beneath this vibrant surface, a current of fear began to stir, a disquiet that grew with each terrifying headline. Alistair, a jazz musician with fingers that danced across the keys of a piano and eyes that missed little in the late-night hours, was a product of this city. In his mid-30s, he was a familiar figure in the dimly lit clubs of the French Quarter, his soulful melodies often stretching into the early hours of the morning. He possessed a healthy dose of cynicism, a byproduct of the city's underbelly, but beneath it lay a hidden romantic streak that found its voice in his music. The fear that gripped New Orleans was centered around a phantom, a shadowy figure known only as the Axeman. He emerged from the darkness, breaking into the homes of Italian grocers under the cover of night. His weapon of choice was an axe, often taken from the victim's own property. The attacks were brutal, senseless, leaving families shattered and the city paralyzed with terror. What made the Axeman even more chilling was the seemingly random nature of his targets and the bizarre details that often followed the gruesome acts. It was said that he would sometimes play the victims' pianos after committing the murders, a macabre serenade in the silent houses of the dead. This detail, more than any other, sent a shiver of irrational fear through the city's inhabitants. Alistair, like everyone else in New Orleans, followed the news of the Axeman's reign of terror with a growing sense of dread. The Italian community lived in constant fear, doors and windows bolted tight against the unseen intruder. But the terror extended beyond a single community. It was a shadow that stretched across the entire city, a reminder that evil could lurk in the darkest corners of even the most vibrant place. As a musician who often worked late into the night, Alistair found himself increasingly aware of the silence of the empty streets after his gigs. Every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat. Every creak of the old buildings sent a jolt of anxiety through him. He started carrying a small, rusty pipe wrench in his coat pocket, a meager defense against an unseen axe. The rumors surrounding the axeman were rampant. Some whispered he was a disgruntled former associate of the victims, seeking revenge. Others spoke of a supernatural entity, a demonic force unleashed upon the city. The lack of any discernible pattern to the attacks only fueled the speculation and the fear. For Alistair, the detail about the piano playing was particularly unsettling. Music was his lifeblood, his solace, his means of expression. The idea of this brutal killer sitting at a piano, filling the silence of a murder scene with melody, was both grotesque and deeply disturbing. He found himself listening more intently to the music he played, wondering if the notes themselves could somehow attract the attention of this phantom, this bringer of silent death. One particularly humid night, after a late gig at a smoky club in the quarter, Alistair walked home through the deserted streets. The gaslights cast long, distorted shadows that danced with the gentle sway of the wrought iron balconies. The air was thick and still, the usual sounds of the city muted by the late hour. As he passed a darkened grocery store, the silence felt heavy, pregnant with a sense of unseen menace. Suddenly, a faint sound drifted from within the darkened store. It was music. A slow, melancholic melody played on what sounded like an out-of-tune piano. Alistair froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He pressed himself against the wall, straining to hear over the blood rushing in his ears. The music was hesitant, almost clumsy, but undeniably there. A wave of icy fear washed over him. Could it be? Was the axeman inside playing his macabre tune? He wanted to run, to disappear into the shadows, but a morbid curiosity held him rooted to the spot. He imagined the scene inside, the silent stillness, the lingering scent of blood, and the shadowy figure hunched over the keys. After what felt like an eternity, the music stopped abruptly. Alistair held his breath, listening for any other sound, any sign of movement. But there was only silence. He slowly backed away, his eyes scanning the darkened windows, a chilling certainty settling in his mind that he had just brushed against the terrifying reality of the Phantom Barber. And so, Alistair walks the shadowy streets of New Orleans, the music of his city now tinged with the fear of an unseen killer who might be listening in the darkness. A chilling reminder that even in the most vibrant of places, a terrifying silence can fall, broken only by the most unsettling of melodies. Now, take a deep breath. Let the humid air of New Orleans fill your lungs one last time. Because our final journey tonight takes us to a place shrouded in mystery and whispered legends. A place where an entire colony vanished without a trace. Are you ready to face the Roanoke whispers? Our journey through the shadows culminates tonight on a wind-swept island steeped in history and shrouded in one of America's most enduring mysteries. We've encountered hums, lights, earthly horrors, and phantom melodies. Now, we arrive at a place where the silence itself seems to speak, where the very air carries the weight of unanswered questions. Our final tale tonight whispers from the shores of Roanoke Island, North Carolina, a place where the past clings to the present like the salt spray on the weathered shores. It's here, on this slender strip of land, that one of history's most perplexing disappearances unfolded, the Lost Colony. In 1587, a group of English settlers arrived, hoping to establish a permanent foothold in the New World. Just 3 years later, when supply ships returned, the colony was gone. No signs of struggle, no bodies, just an empty settlement and the cryptic carving on a wooden post, Crow and Dr. Evelyn Reed, a historical linguist in her early 50s, arrived on Roanoke Island with a singular focus: to unravel a piece of this enduring puzzle. Meticulous and driven by the cold, hard logic of language, she had always held a certain disdain for folklore and romantic speculation. The disappearance of the Roanoke colonists, in her view, was a historical problem to be solved through rigorous research and linguistic analysis, not through ghost stories and fanciful theories. She set up her base in a small, rented cottage overlooking the Sound, the constant cry of seagulls, a familiar soundtrack to her days. Her research took her through dusty archives, old maps, and the fragmented accounts of the time. She pored over the possible meanings of Croatoan, the name of a nearby island, and a local Native American tribe. Was it a clue, a destination, or something else entirely? Evelyn spent hours exploring the historical sites on the island, the windswept fields where the colony once stood, the lonely beaches where the colonists might have looked out at the vast, unknown ocean. It was during these solitary explorations that she began to notice something unsettling. It started subtly, a faint whisper on the wind, so indistinct that she initially dismissed it as the sound of the breeze rustling through the tall grasses or the distant murmur of the waves. But as the days passed, the whispers became more persistent, more defined. They were still soft, barely audible, but she began to perceive the cadence of speech, though the words themselves remained frustratingly indecipherable. The whispers seemed to be most pronounced near the site where the Croatoan carving had reportedly been found. Standing there, amidst the windswept landscape, Evelyn would often hear them, a chorus of hushed voices, just at the edge of her hearing, like a secret being shared on the breath of the wind. Her logical mind struggled to find an explanation. The wind playing tricks? The echo of the waves? Stress and overwork? She tried to rationalize it, to find a scientific basis for the auditory illusions. But a nagging doubt began to creep into her carefully constructed world of facts and evidence. One afternoon, as a storm gathered on the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray, Evelyn found herself drawn back to the Croatoan site. The wind howled around her, carrying with it the intensified whispers. This time, she could almost make out individual sounds, the rise and fall of voices speaking in a language she didn't recognize, yet somehow felt ancient. A chill that had nothing to do with the approaching storm ran down her spine. For the first time, Evelyn, the staunch rationalist, felt a flicker of something akin to fear. Could it be her imagination running wild, fueled by the island's haunting history? Or was there something more to these whispers? A lingering echo of the lost souls, forever bound to this place. She tried to record the sounds, hoping to analyze them later, but her equipment picked up only the howling wind. The whispers remained elusive, a phenomenon perceptible only to her ears. She started to feel isolated, questioning her own sanity. Was the weight of the historical mystery finally breaking through her logical defenses? One evening, huddled in her cottage as the storm raged outside, Evelyn found an old journal entry from one of the early researchers of the lost colony. It spoke of strange sounds heard on the island, of whispers carried on the wind, sounds that the local Native Americans attributed to the spirits of the vanished colonists. Evelyn had dismissed such accounts as folklore, the product of superstitious minds. Now she wasn't so sure. As the wind shrieked outside, Evelyn closed her eyes and listened. The whispers were there, faint but persistent, weaving through the storm's fury. They seemed to be calling out, a chorus of lost voices carried on the breath of centuries. And in that moment, Dr. Evelyn Reed, the historical linguist who had come to Roanoke Island seeking answers in the tangible past, began to wonder if some mysteries transcended logic, if some voices could linger on the wind long after they had fallen silent. And so, our journey through the shadows ends here, on the windswept shores of Roanoke, with the whispers of the lost colony carried on the breeze. A chilling reminder that some mysteries may never be solved, that some silences may forever hold the echoes of the unknown. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the darkness. I hope these tales have stirred your imaginations and perhaps, just perhaps, left you with a delicious shiver as you drift off to sleep. Until next time, when the shadows gather once more, good night.